Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Prosperous Nonprofit. I am super excited to be here today with Ivan Gilreath and Deena Terry of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Scottsdale. Ivan and Deena, welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so first, I would love for you each to tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Scottsdale. Ivan, why don't you go first?
All righty. Well, I've been with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Scottsdale for a little bit over 2.5 years now. Prior to that, I was in Omaha, Nebraska, where I ran the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Midlands for exactly 10 years, and moved down to Arizona to be closer to my two kids and my three grandsons. And so we've got a family affair down here. Before that, going way back, is I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was a boys club member way back in the early days of the boys club, back in the 60s, if you will. So I grew up a boys club member, and at 13, everybody in my house had to work because I had a single parent, my mother, who raised five kids. I was the youngest one, and so we all had to work. So at 13, I went away from the boys club and went and worked at McDonald's, and from there went on to get my undergraduate and graduate degree in business from the University of Nebraska, and then spent 30 years in the for-profit sector, most of that being with Mutual of Omaha in Omaha. So I was in the insurance industry, and my last 5 years in the for-profit sector was with a company called ING, which is now Voya, where I ran a division of that company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And when I was getting to the end of my career on that side of business, I always knew I wanted to go back and work for an organization like Boys and Girls Club that did so much for me when I was young. So it just so happens when I was reaching that point in my life where I said it feels like the right time to make a move. Uh, the person who was running the Boys and Girls Club in Omaha was retiring, so it was something that was a fateful moment where when I thought it was the right time, it happened to be the right time for the Boys and Girls Clubs as well. So I've been in the nonprofit sector now for almost 13 years after 30 years in the for-profit sector.
That's amazing. So you have a very wide breadth of experience, which I'm definitely going to ask you about later. But thank you for sharing that. Deena, what about you? What has your background looked like? What's your journey looked like to get you to Boys and Girls Clubs right now?
So that's interesting. I've actually been in nonprofits or governmental accounting my whole career. I had one job right out of high school while I was in high school, actually, at a golf course. And that's my only retail job because I knew right away that I wanted to work for something, an organization with a higher purpose, if you will, or a mission. And so I went right from after college into the government service. I was a civil servant for about 6 years with the government. And then once that was done, I got out of civil service and went into nonprofits. My first job was with a foster care and adoption agency. So that was a lot of working with kids and helping them be placed in great environments, good homes, both foster and adoption homes. And then I went to a community health center that was a FQHC. So that's a federally qualified health center. We served the underserved population in our communities, medical, dental, vision, things like that. From there, I went to a mental health rehabilitation center. That was a private organization, but we served people from all over the country. And then we had to move. We decided to leave Michigan and come to Arizona to be closer to my in-laws, help them out. And I got really lucky. BGCS is right around the corner from my house. So I get to walk every day to work. And I've been here, November will be 2 years. It's been a great experience. And I kind of feel like every job I did before this job led me here. I love the mission. There are pieces of every job I had prior to this that factor into what I'm doing here. So it's been a great experience, and we've had a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. I love how, yeah, our journey sort of like reveals itself to us as
Mhm.
we go, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up, but all of the pieces kind of make sense when you get there. So, I love that for you, Deena. That's so cool. Well, you both have so much experience in the nonprofit sector, and I feel like especially in the last few years, we've seen so many changes in the sector between different funding priorities for our donors and changing technology and a remote workforce and of course like a global pandemic. And so what changes have you each seen in the sector, and sort of how have you in your roles, whether it's at BGCS or otherwise, sort of dealt with those changes? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first this time, Dina. I'll let you go first next time. But
Okay.
as you know, we're just coming out of the global pandemic, and during the global pandemic, a lot changed for us because we're an organization that really values having as many kids as we can in our programs, and so during the pandemic, it was really weird because we couldn't do that anymore. And so it really gave us a chance to focus on some safety initiatives that are very important in our business as well. So I believe we've come out of the pandemic a much safer environment for kids in terms of just staff to child ratios, cleanliness, safety of our rooms, just spacing and how we interact with each other. So it really gave us a chance to step back and look at the safety initiatives while we dealt with smaller numbers. Now that we're back to our regular numbers again, I feel like we're a much safer environment for kids because we were really forced to look and focus on those things. And I also believe now that we become programmatically even a better organization because during the pandemic we had to figure out different ways to deliver our programming than we used to do before the pandemic. So now, in addition to being back together and doing programs together, we have more remote type options and more things we can do with our kids. So I believe where we've got a broader way of looking at things, and then of course Zoom has changed all of our life because it used to be everybody had to meet in person. And we have 9 locations here in Scottsdale. So sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to meet in person because meeting in person takes a couple of hours out of the day of the people who are coming here to meet with us. So we still meet together because it's important to meet together and have that interaction directly. But now we don't have to meet together and we can still be effective and we can make efficient use of everyone's time. So I believe the pandemic, as bad as it was, it brought more efficiencies and more safety initiatives to the forefront of what we do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really interesting to, have been able to use this time that was, of course, very difficult and challenging for so many, but to use it as a time to really strengthen your operation so that when you did come out the other side, you're, a better organization, better able to serve the kids. So I think that's a really interesting take. So thank you for sharing that. Deena, what do you think? What have you seen? What changes have you seen in the sector? What challenges have you faced? And, how have you sort of overcome those challenges?
So I guess I want to piggyback a little bit on the pandemic because I worked 3 different jobs during the pandemic, and that's what I saw too was, we're nonprofits, and a lot of times people think that means that we don't have to make a profit or we can't make a profit. But when you're faced with a pandemic like that, and at the community health center, we couldn't even see patients for a long time, so we lost a lot of revenue that way. At the mental health center, we couldn't do events for the residents like we used to, and then here at the Boys and Girls Clubs, we couldn't have kids in the clubs. I think it forced every one of the corporations I've worked for to rethink the quality of their programming and to find new and innovative ways to bring quality programming to whatever we were doing in that environment. So there's that side of things. I think that services really have improved. Another big thing I've seen is, federal grants. So funding has changed for nonprofits. So I think we have to rethink how we look at our budgets and how we track our revenue sources. And I think that with the federal funding, there's been an effect. It hasn't been a negative effect on independent donors or private donors. I think that they've seen the plight we face and they've come to the table too. So I think that that's what's come out of the pandemic. And I think the other challenges are just like I've talked about earlier, the whole nonprofit, the illusion of, nope, you can't make a profit and things like that. That's always been a challenge in the nonprofit sector. So
that's what I was just going to say and kind of come back to. I think that's such an interesting point that I am always trying to stress. It's like, just because we're called nonprofits doesn't mean that we should have $0 left over at the end of the year. We should not be spending every single dollar that comes in the door. And so I think you're right. The pandemic really hopefully, I don't know, like shifted people's thinking. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we probably shouldn't budget to spend every last penny that we bring in this year, because we need a cushion. We need a reserve, a rainy day fund. And it's been really difficult for those organizations that did not have one throughout the pandemic. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I wonder, like, I wonder where organizations are at with this, if we're going to start to see a change in this sector overall, or still not. Like, I don't know where that mindset is in the sector, where there's sort of like abundance versus scarcity mindset. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it is going to change the way the financial people in these organizations anyway look at revenue. And I think that it's also going to increase the applications for grants. I think that grants have become a huge part of the nonprofit world.
Yeah, and I would add there, our umbrella organization, Boys and Girls Club of America, they've come out recently with a new set of membership requirements. So we're a federated model. So we sort of act like a franchise. So we have our own board of directors, but we still have to follow certain membership requirements of Boys and Girls Club of America. And one of the new membership requirements is that all clubs, and they've got over 1,000 organizations like us in the movement, all clubs must have a cash reserve on hand. And that previously wasn't a requirement. Now, the recommended amount of the cash reserve is 3 months of cash on hand. So your average expenses for a month times 3. So that's the average. So, you're starting to see, and you can't get a cash reserve unless you get in more revenue than you have expenses. And so, but that is a fine line, Stephanie. It's a fine line, because the services that we provide, our donors expect us to spend our money on our kids. They're giving to us because they want to make sure the programs and the services that we told them we were going to do for the kids, we do in fact do. So it's a fine line there, but you obviously have to have some surplus to get your cash reserves to where they need to be, so you are a solid, financially secure organization. And so I believe more nonprofits are looking at it that way, because in years past, nonprofits would really have no cash on hand, and we all know that's a very dangerous model to have.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I think is so important to building that cash reserve is having like a diverse revenue portfolio, which I think you all have, right? Because you've got your program service revenue from your programs, but then there's also grants and individual donations and things like that. But I've seen lots of organizations, and maybe you have as well, where they're getting pretty much all of their revenue from one type of source. Maybe it's just grants, and those grants are all like pretty restricted. And so they're running into the issue where, okay, well, we don't have a lot of unrestricted dollars to pay for, our finance team salaries or whatever. So I think like revenue diversity is super important as well to help build that cash reserve. Does Boys and Girls Clubs of America, do they have any sort of policies or guidelines on revenue diversity?
I don't know that I've seen any of those, but all of the organizations around the country know that our push should be for operating dollars. So operating dollars are dollars that you can use in any capacity to run the business, because 80% of our budget is people.
Mhm.
And so we have to have enough money to pay our people. So if we have too many dollars tied up in restricted request, it can really get you upside down. And we had that problem a few years ago, and we have consciously tried to push toward more operating dollars. But the clubs don't have a policy on that. But we all understand the importance of asking donors for operating dollars versus the restricted dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Deena, what have you seen in terms of like, that connection between having a diverse revenue portfolio, having a cash reserve, or any organizations that you've seen that maybe have not had such a diverse revenue portfolio, and like where they've ended up with that?
Yeah, so the problem with not having a diversified portfolio is if you have one source or one or two sources and that dries up, you're really in trouble. So one thing we've done here at BGCS recently is BGCA does have a product called My Club Hub. And so we've actually implemented that. We've been working with that for about a year now. We put it in last September. And one thing that's been phenomenal with My Club Hub is we now have so much more visibility into our program revenue. So we can see exactly what we're charging, exactly what we should be collecting, exactly what's sitting there in a non-payment, pot, if you will. And that has been wonderful for us, because I think, I know actually that program revenue is kind of becoming the bigger source of our revenue than our donations. I mean, we're getting there. And BGCA has a recommended or a suggested percentage of what your contribution should be to your total revenue. And I think we're over that in contributions, but the program revenue is going to, I think, take that over. So I feel really, really diversified in this job. So I think we're on the right path.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that you have that data at your fingertips. I mean, I'm always talking to like anyone and everyone who will listen. Like, it's so important to know your numbers so that you can make really smart decisions. So, one of my questions was, how have you used technology to further your fundraising, further your strategic decision making? And I think you just like partially answered that. But it sounds like having this sort of data forward or data driven process can also support your revenue growth. So I don't know, talk more about that. Talk more about data, technology, and how has that really helped you both to make really smart decisions for the organization?
Well, as far as sales, so My Club Hub is actually a Salesforce platform. And so it's interesting because we use Salesforce for our contributions. Our development department uses that. And then this My Club Hub product, it does have a donation module that we could add on. We're not doing that right now because we're trying to keep those separate for now. But the way that program works, I mean, they're both basically databases. But I know from my side, My Club Hub, the information I have at hand, we can track AR at any given moment. I mean, it's at the touch of a button, and it's live, it's real time. So that allows us, every day we can be going after collections. We can be making sure that, we're not getting too far off the path there of what we have and what we're supposed to get. So that has been a phenomenal tool as far as not generating revenue, but making sure we're collecting our revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Deena and I are both structured, data-driven people, and for years, sort of what you would hear about folks who work with nonprofits were, how they kind of just ran by the seat of their pants and didn't really run it like a business. And we're both firm believers that this is a business. It's a significant business. And what really helps me is my 30 years of actually running a business, coming in here, realizing what we do and how we do it, but also we need to look at this from the standpoint of it being a business. It needs to be a profitable business. It needs to be a successful business, and it needs to be an outcomes driven business. And so for us, I think data is key. And we weren't doing a good job of billing and collecting before we got this My Club Hub product in here, and it's really changed our world, if you will. And then even on development, even though development is pretty much a meet with people and build relationships kind of thing, you can't effectively do that without good data. You need good data on who your donors are, how they've historically given, who your targets are in terms of donors, and how they've historically given to other organizations. So you really can't do any aspect of this job correctly without good data.
So true. Yeah. As a finance numbers spreadsheet person, I could not agree more. And that is a really great segue into my next question. So Ivan, you as the CEO, Deena, you as the CFO, you both have the same mindset when it comes to data, which is fantastic. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about what your sort of CEO, CFO working relationship looks like. How do you really complement each other's work? Are there any areas where maybe you butt heads, not in not in an aggressive way, but like you have differences of opinion, we'll say. But what does that working relationship look like? Because I think you guys have like a very good sort of balance going on, that CEO CFO work together. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, as you know, Stephanie, Deena and I started working together, maybe not in the best of circumstances. We here were without a CFO here. The CFO we had departed, and you really couldn't find the right candidate for that particular role for me. And that was around the time Deena had moved down here, and we had your firm sort of doing the CFO responsibilities for us at that time. And at that time, we needed to stabilize our finance infrastructure. And Deena just moved to town, and so we brought her in as a controller to help with some of the day-to-day finances, realizing she had a wealth of experience, but really didn't know much about the club. So we brought her in as a controller while we kept 100 Degrees Consulting there to sort of help fractionally with some of the CFO duties. So by having that kind of relationship where right away we didn't put the full duties of CFO on Deena and relied on your firm and allowed her to learn the business, learn me learn her, it really gave us a chance to develop a relationship from not as much of a pressure cooker scenario. And so we were able to learn what each other likes and how we can more effectively work together. And we sort of built it to the point where Deena was taking on all of the CFO responsibilities. It got to a point where we no longer needed your firm. Thank you so much for all you did to get us there. But we had a chance to grow the relationship without having it in the pressure cooker environment from day one. So we learned how to work with each other, and that sort of carried on to now that she's CFO. I know how she looks at things. She knows what I expect to see. Great relationship with our chair of the finance committee, and so it really allowed us to grow the relationship organically in the right way to where we learned what makes each other tick.
I love that. What are your thoughts, Deena?
So first thing that comes to my mind is, Stephanie, during the interview process when I was interviewing, one of the comments that I made was, I'm a friendly introvert, because we were talking about a finance person versus, and I think that's one thing. I think I would say that Ivan's much more extroverted than me, but that works for us. We complement each other that way because I'm the introvert. But other than that, I think that Ivan and I have very similar ways of thinking. We're in agreement on a lot of things. And one example is, it's a nonprofit. There's a wonderful mission involved, but it's also a business. And one of the things we've done is the 9 locations that we talked about, we're having the directors of each location run their own budget like a business. So we're very like-minded in that. So I think we have the same goals, and I think we're working really well towards accomplishing our goals.
Yeah, I think that's so smart what you said, Ivan, about not having thrown Deena into this like firefighter role where it's like, come in, you got to fix all these things. Good luck. And just like letting her fend for herself, because that's such a recipe for like instant burnout and just not being happy in the role and not really being effective. And so I think that was so thoughtful and so strategic. And I think it's so important when organizations are thinking about bringing a CFO on or bringing another leader on to really ask themselves, okay, do we have the capacity to set them up for success? And so you absolutely did that when you hired Deena by, being able to ease her in and having additional support that you were able to provide. So she's not just coming in and having to fight all the fires, because that's not fun for anyone. So I think that was really smart to have her be able to be set up for success. And I remember, Deena, when like we were officially like our team was sort of rolling out, I'm like, or actually I think when we were in our initial conversations, maybe even before you got the job, like my goal is to have everything wrapped up like in a nice little box, wrapped up with a bow, and to be able to like hand that off to you. And so I think that, yeah, I think that's great. And Deena, I think it's such a good point that you are both, you're both really data driven and you think very similarly, yet you also have complementary sort of assets. Because yeah, I have often I've seen several organizations that just like churn through CFOs because the CFO and the CEO just think too differently, and are not on the same page when it comes to some of those essential things. So that's another reason I want to have you both on, because I think, your relationship is a great example, for other organizations that are thinking about hiring a CFO.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
Stephanie, we were one of those organizations. We've churned through some CFOs prior to me being here, and I think it's because we'd bring them in. They didn't know much about the organization, didn't know, and we said, fix it. And
Mhm.
they're like, I don't even know how to spell it yet, and you're telling me how to fix it. And so, it just wasn't a recipe for success. So that's why having organizations like yours that can help bridge a situation to where we can really grow the people we bring in and also grow our relationship a little bit different way than normally organizations have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and
Go
that
ahead.
gave me a chance. I really enjoyed working with you and your firm because that gave me a chance to kind of, I know that we were both kind of thrown into a situation in one fiscal year where we were scrambling, but we were in it together. So that was helpful for me to kind of learn the ropes with you, with your firm. And then that allowed me the chance to get to know Ivan better and to grow on this side in the office. So that was a
Mhm.
wonderful opportunity. And I think I'm better for it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it was just a really smart process, I think. And, given that now you are the CFO, you're coming up on your 2-year anniversary, like clearly the process worked. And so I think it's just a lesson for anybody listening as you're thinking of bringing in a leader to the organization. How can you do it in a really thoughtful way, so you're not throwing them into the fire and giving them a list of 50 things to fix and say, good luck.
Yes,
um,
yes.
yeah. So what do you see, like if we had a little crystal ball looking into the future of the nonprofit sector, what do you see? Just it doesn't have to be anything specific. It could be related to finances or programming or funders or whatever. Are there any sort of trends that you're seeing or predictions that you have, what's coming down the pike for us as nonprofit leaders?
Well, I believe, and I think this trend has kind of been out there for a while. Your funders, in particular, your foundations, they're really raising the bar on what they expect from nonprofits. It used to be that you just go and ask for funding and you may or may not get it, but now they're challenging you more to know what you're going to do strategically, what you're going to do innovatively and what you're going to do in terms of reporting and outcomes. And so I believe in a good way, the bar continues to be raised on what is expected of nonprofits. And I believe the leadership in the nonprofit community, the requirements there and the talent that's being hired in the nonprofits is really at that level where, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you should be sloppy. You should have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. And so I believe that challenge making us better is going to make what we offer better for our members and for our families in the future, because we're holding ourselves to a higher standard, which means that the standards will be higher for what we provide our members and their families.
I love that. Yeah, like elevating the level of professionalism in the sector will result in, an elevation of the programs and the impact that we're able to have. I love that. What do you think, Deena?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I have seen in my career, it used to be that private donors, grantors, they would just give you the money without very many restrictions at all. They wouldn't ask for much back. But now you have programming requirements, you have reporting requirements, and it's not just the grants, it's the donors as well. So there's that extra, you have to be a good steward, and you have to show that you're being a good steward, number one. Number two, I think Ivan's right. I think nonprofits in the old days, when I first started, a lot of nonprofits were kind of run like a mom and pop. And that does not exist anymore. If it does, it's very rare. And so for me in my career, I never wanted to cross that line. I always wanted to stay in the nonprofit sector. Like I said, I like a mission. I like being part of a team. But in my day, it wasn't possible. Once you were in a nonprofit, you couldn't get to that retail or profit side because they didn't think you had the skills to succeed and to run that type of business. I think that's becoming less and less the case. And people that are now just getting into finance, accounting, I think they can do either one they want, because nonprofits are held to the same standards as profits these days.
And I think that just places such an emphasis on technology and systems. And, we need to be able to spend money on these things so that we can elevate the level of the work and the analysis that we're doing. And I just think that's so important to be able to have those systems sort of as the foundation of the work that you're doing. So you actually can, use that data, make strategic decisions, things like that. So yeah, great insights. Thank you. Ivan, were you going to say something else or no?
No, I was just
No.
I was just thinking about not here in Scottsdale, but when I was in Omaha, and one time I had a meeting with one of my longtime they had been with the clubs in Omaha for years, and they came into me and they said, "We're running this like a business." And I was like, "Yes, we are. And we're going to continue to run this like a business." I'm like, "It is a business." And they were dead serious, because they had never had any structure in terms of how to handle expenses and revenue and programming. And they were like, "You're running this like a business." I said, "Well, yes, I am a
Yeah.
businessman. And that's the way we're going to run it."
And,
But
and
never losing sight of why we're here.
right.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, being a good businessman also makes you a good steward, because you're not just taking that money for granted and throwing it at whatever. You're thinking about, where am I putting this money? How much am I spending? So that's all good in the end.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
give you another example if I could, Stephanie, and Deena knows
Yeah.
this. To not overemphasize the business part of it, but we deal with a lot of kids who can't afford to come. And so program revenue is one of the things that we need, that we thrive on. But Deena and I are in sync on, if somebody can't pay, if somebody can't pay and they can justify to us they can't pay, it just can't be somebody telling us somebody can't pay. So if they can justify that they can't afford to pay, we will let them in the club free, because that's a good business decision for us, and that's a good decision for our mission. We will never turn a kid away because they can't pay. So we're not business people to a fault, where we're like, if you can't pay, you can't come, because we're here to take care of the kids who need us most. So being a good businessman is deciding sometimes you have to do whatever you can to make sure you serve the population you're here to serve.
Yeah, it's like being, running a business isn't all about money. It's the
Yes.
money is part of it, but it's also the impact. And so I think that it's a both and situation
Yes.
rather than an either or situation. And I love that
Yes.
that's the way that you run your organization. That's yeah, I think that's huge. So my last question as we are wrapping up, and I would love to hear from both of you, what does a prosperous nonprofit look like to you?
Deena, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So to me, a prosperous nonprofit is one, as we discussed, that's not necessarily doing a balanced zero budget, revenue expenses, but one that's accomplishing its mission successfully. And that means that the people that you're trying to help are the services you're providing are quality services that people are getting the most they can out of them. Um, and also keeping the staff happy. It's always good to have a staff who loves what they're doing and is out there feeling like they're appreciated. And if you have both of those, I think you have a successful nonprofit.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, all of what Deena said, and I just think a successful nonprofit needs to be strategic. We're in the third year of a 3-year strategic plan, and we'll be working on a new 3-year strategic plan in the spring. So I think you need to be strategic. You need to kind of have a roadmap of where you want to go. You always have to be forward thinking. You just can't sit on your laurels. You got to think about where you want to be in the future. And then finally, based on everything we've been talking about in this call, you got to be well run, and well managed. So, in addition to what Deena said, those are my additional thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you just said. So, Ivan, Deena, thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a great conversation, and it was just nice to catch up with you both. So, thank you so much.
Thanks,
All right,
Stephanie. It was fun.
go Patriots. We got a good running back yesterday.
Yes, that's right. Oh, I miss our NFL talks every Monday.